And I don't know if you peeped the humble brag, right? Because he's like, yeah, my second master's, I'm like, this guy right here. But so let's get into it. So yeah, Byron.
Yeah, so our agenda here this evening, there's going to be a lot of information being thrown at you. I implore everybody to rewatch the show, take your time, take some screenshots because it's a lot of information. There's a lot more information, but the agenda for this evening is going to be, the introduction. That's kind of what we just started, building some confidence. So we're gonna just talk about like the background up until we get into West Africa. We want to engage the audience, of course, and we're gonna have some visual aids to kind of talk about um, the ideas towards the end about where areas are we particularly looking into, and then BK and I talk about some final tips and takeaways. Like, what does this mean moving forward within the UA community, or just people who just students of history?
Cool.
Do that on this show, and it will talk a little bit as to why that is the case. And then lastly, because this always comes up when you talk about Africa, right? Is what was the color or shade of all different types of Africans? And we say that because we often want to talk about Africa being this the most diverse continent and having all these different things. How big as Africa is, being a motherland, but often we want to just make Africa look one way when we know that it's many different types of people with different phenotypes, shades of skin, uh, uh, hair types, everything like that, all indigenous to the continent of Africa. So
Right.
here, we're not doing that the shade tree game here. We're not doing that.
And if I could add to the list of what we are not stating, we are not stating that Jesus existed. We're not stating that. We're not stating that, the inerrancy of scripture. We're not talking about that, right? We're not talking about whether or not African or African Americans should be Christians. We're not saying that either. Okay. And it's really important that you understand that, because what me and B are going to do afterwards, we're going to do a follow-up show. And that whole follow-up show is going to be dealing with people in the comment section who have a hard time listening. And if you say something that we did not say in this presentation, we're going to make you famous. Because for some reason, people have a hard time listening. So that the whole thing will be us just screenshotting your comments and saying, see, this person did not listen because this is what we're stating, and now they're stating something else.
Bingo.
All right.
Bingo.
So
what we are stating, right? Christianity existed in pre-colonial West Africa, right? So this is a modest claim that we're stating, is that we're not even stating something like prior to even European contact. At least we aren't, right? You may see some of our sources state otherwise, but this is what we're stating: pre-colonial, so pre-Portuguese, right? Um, it was significant enough to be documented by Arabs and Europeans. So we're not talking about how large or how small, but we're all saying that it's significant enough that Arab Muslims and then Europeans later noted on a significant enough scale that we still have evidence to this day that, hey, this existed. Um, we are saying that other Africans kept the narratives, their oral history. So if you are a pro-black or pro-African or just a student of history, you have to take oral histories of different peoples into consideration. You can't just throw it away because it wasn't written down in some type of way. Um, Artifacts, they're going to talk about artifacts that seem to coincide with the given data, and then we're going to talk about how Africans mission evangelize to other Africans. So basically what the Great Commission is telling us to do.
right, right, right. So the gospel in West Africa.
So the Gospel of West Africa, I want to talk about, as you see, 4 or 5 different bullet points here. There's a thing called the Nigerian knot. There's kingdoms. There's actual kingdoms talked about. Oral traditions. Prester John, that's going to be an interesting one when we get to there. And the archaeological accounts. So Just keep in mind, I even talk about just briefly the Nigerian knot real quick. And all it's simply stating is that there's if you look at Nigerian knot, it's normally associated with northern Nigeria, but a lot of people, scholars have noted that it's come out of the Berber tradition, the North African tradition, into West Africa, and it is a derivation of them trying to create the cross. So the Nigerian knot has a lot of Christian influence into what we have today. And so when you want to know like what's a West African ancient cross you can look at, maybe look at like the Nigerian knot as a fixture, which I actually I actually wear it sometimes too. So
Cool. All right. Key terms.
key terms here. Please pay attention. Tropical, savanna, and Sudan. I can't state that enough because what you're going to see is a lot of oftentimes these writers are using these three terminologies to describe what they mean in what we know today as West Africa. So tropical, savanna, and Sudan, and we're going to do our best to try to define some of these terms in a second, so you can get an understanding.
All right. I'll read this.
Yeah,
The African savanna biome, is that how you say it?
biome.
Biome is a tropical grassland in Africa between latitude 15 degrees north and 30 degrees south and longitude 15 degrees west and 40 degrees west. It covers what's that? Oh my gosh.
Guinea.
Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Nigeria, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Angola, Uganda, Rwanda, the Burundi, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Botswana, and South Africa. Okay, that's a lot.
So now, as you just stated, so you can see in your mind, but get a picture of when we say savannah, this is the area we're talking. We're not just talking about the coast. It's within the interior of Africa.
Right. The area known as the Western Sudan encompasses the broad expanse of savanna that stretches between the vast Sahara Desert to the north and the tropical rainforest of, why are you messing up this word? It's Guinea?
Yes, sir. Guinea.
Oh, gosh. Coast to the south. Its name comes from Balad al Sudan, or land of blacks, the term used by the Arabic travelers, geographers, and historians who first wrote of the region's history. The medieval empire of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai that controlled the Western Sudan had no fixed geopolitical boundaries or singular ethnic or national identities.
So that's important. That last statement is so you get an idea of like the some of the empires that was going on at the time. But keep in mind, because some people may ask you, okay, so which African were they? Were they Yoruba? Were they Igbo? Were they Mandi? Were they like there was no fixed national identity or singular one. There were all these different ethnic groups that made up these different kingdoms.
All right. The Kingdom of Aksum.
So the Kingdom Aksum is important because I want to lay the groundwork because this is probably one of the most known kingdoms that we know today within Christian history. We call the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It is the oldest and largest sub-Saharan African church that we see today. And it's always the most mystery that everybody wants to say. It seems like everybody wants to stake some type of claim into like, yeah, you guys aren't the Ethiopians, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we're going to kind of talk about what this means and what it doesn't mean. But it existed. The Kingdom of Exum was modern day Ethiopian Eritrea. It's part of the Great Lakes tradition. So you have different things in Africa. You have like the Nile Valley tradition, you have the North African tradition, or the Maghreb, you have the Sahel, you have the West African tradition, and this is the Great Lakes tradition. With the Great Lakes within more the central eastern part of Africa. As we stated, the oldest independent sub-Saharan African church. It was said that part of it was where the legend of Prester John was, and emphasis on legend because we'll talk about what that actually means. And this is some important points here. So Ethiopian reports of missions enter into the eastern side of Kingdom of Congo, and you see here at the bottom the source for that Ethiopian Congo, a tale of two medieval kingdoms. And so during this time frame, we often hear about the Congo of their first contact with Christianity being the Portuguese. Well, in actuality, in within the Ethiopian tradition, they actually carry um, this kind of history of they were in contact with that other medieval kingdom because they were two very large, powerful medieval kingdoms, the Congo and Aksumite Empire at that time. And so they actually had some missions going back and forth. And we're still trying to discover more of those because it's harder to get just that information into not only the U.S. but in English because it's these in these different languages.
This is from
So
early
yeah. Oh no,
Christianity
go ahead, GJ. Go ahead. You got it.
early Christianity in Africa, North Africa, the Sahara, the Sudan, Central and East Africa, a contribution to ethno history by Ludwig Brandl, page 486 on Ethiopia. So you want me to,
So
yeah. Want me
I
to
can
say it
read it.
or? I get it.
Yeah, I can read it. I can read it. No problem. So it says about the year 525, at the time of the Jewish king Naus, Christian refugees from Yemen reached the Sudan. Nawas persecuted the Christians of his kingdom, and King Caleb of Ethiopia was asked by Emperor Justinian to attack the pro-Persian Nawas. Comas, a traveler to India, saw with his own eyes.
I put the link in the chat. I've just for the record, you guys know me already. I don't be sitting down watching YouTube videos, so I've never watched this video. I heard it's pretty good. I'm watching it with an open mind. Because of course, I don't believe no Christian kingdom was in West Africa before colonialism. I do not believe that. I don't believe no Christian kingdom was in West Africa before colonialism. I do not believe that. I don't believe no Christian kingdom was in West Africa before colonialism. I do not believe that. Sub-Saharan Africa is a tricky word because Ethiopia today of Kingdom of Aksum is below the Sahara. So that's kind of tricky. We can't say there was no Christian kingdom in Sub-Saharan Africa when there was Ethiopia. You understand? So let's be careful. This dude is an educated dude. He's not one of them pseudo guys. So let's give it the opportunity. I've never heard him before. So just relax. Let's just relax. And if anybody wants to click the link and do commentary with the video, anybody's welcome, of course. Y'all know I don't hold back. So let's go. Let's get it.
How Caleb organized an expedition against Yemen. After the campaign was finished, Abraha was appointed governor of Yemen, but after a period of 2 years, he made himself independent. And then as we fast forward a little bit more, it says in earlier times in the regions of central Bornu and Kanam on Lake Chad were already established destination points of many migrants and Christians, as the Kisara legend tells us. We'll talk about that legend in a little bit. The Bornu tradition has it that the Oba Wadala were former Christians. The Wandala or Mandara came from the Fazan. The Beulah, who were under the first king, are said to have come from the Red Sea to Lake Fitri via the Kofadan, who Christians as well. Today, the Beulah people live in northwest of Yola in Nigeria. So what is this segment saying? It's a large segment. I kind of broke it up. When you in the source material, you can read it for yourself. It's detailing that not only the history of the Ethiopian tradition, but it also shows how even then there were evidences of people from the Aksumite Empire traveling westward into the Chadic, into the Niger Congo River Valley regions. So based off of their evidences, what they're saying is that even the Ethiopian tradition has evidence of traveling into what we would call West Africa today as Christians, as you can see. So I want to state this. This is not comprehensive. More work needs to be done. But
hold on, before I hear his response, come on, man. Let's stop playing keyboard order. Let's jump on. We got to be very careful when we hear these traditions and oral traditions, right? Now, King Katura, let's stick to the topic. Now, with that being said, of Duas and what he did, and some people ran into the Sahel region, you know, that whole road that they take come from the east to the west or whatever. Okay. It's still no, it wasn't shipwreck Assyrians. No. They got Christianity late. They got it around 4th century AD. What I'm trying to figure out, let's have the reasoning. I want to see, this is not a comprehensive, more needs to be done, but it's enough data to show a solid conclusion. Christian influence in the northern savanna areas of tropical Africa is even older than Portuguese influence. It came from 3 sources: early North African Christianity, medieval Nubia, and European Christians who crossed the desert beginning in the 17th century. Okay, all right. Let's listen to what he's saying. I'm all ears.
But it is enough data for us to show a
Enough.
solid conclusion.
Mm.
So, and this comes directly from the book you see at the bottom, The Catholic Church in Tropical Africa, 1445 to 1850 by Joseph Kinney, and chapter 5 from the Gospel Across the Sahara and from Nubia. And this is important. Christian influence in the northern savanna areas of tropical Africa, as we stated before, is even older than Portuguese influence. So I want to say that again. Christian influence in the northern savanna of tropical Africa is even older than Portuguese influence. It came from 3 sources: early North African Christianity, 2, medieval Nubia, and then 3, European Christians who crossed the desert beginning in the 17th century. And the reason why we started with the Ethiopian context, because at the time of this book, some of the information about what was going on from Ethiopia into West Africa didn't exist. So more than likely, this book was to go and reprint again. They would include that information to say, hey, that bullet point 3 probably would move to bullet point 4, and the third bullet point would be the Ethiopians as well. BK, anything you want to add or talk about with this?
No, this is great. This is great.
So here what do the experts have to say? So evidence of archaeology and Christian symbols in early North African Christianity penetrated the nomadic Berbers very extensively. This is coming from the same book we just referenced. Even if it's not always deeply and after the Muslim conquest, many of the Christians took refuge in the desert. As a result, Tasmashek's vocabulary still contains Christian terminology. For instance, the word for angel. The Andes cross, similar crosses from other Tuareg towns are likely of original Christian inspiration. The northern knot of Nigeria, as I stated earlier, in its various styles, fits clearly into this cross series. Its depiction on the floor of the ruin of St. Augustine's Cathedral in Hippo, which is in Algeria today, now removed to Pava, demonstrates this. And so if you get the book, they actually have a picture of that cathedral that existed in North Africa, and it's literally just like the North African knot. And actually, when I go back on the screen later, I'll show you. I actually have one that I just crosses on. It's also often called a Berber cross. Again, with this has a Christian inspiration with it as well too. And these people that you see, the Tasmac vocabulary, that's typically a Berber or Imajan vocabulary, and the Tuareg people are one of the Berber clans that we'll be talking about from North Africa. So, unlike mountainous and insular Ethiopia, which confined Christian evangelization, to the limits of imperial expansion, Nubia spread its influence over the savanna plains to the west. Ruins of churches and monasteries are found in Darfur and the Chad al-Ghazal region. Ruins of burnt brick construction of Nubian inspiration are found as far as Bornu. The Nubian Forme cross found its way to Bornu, and as far as Benin City before the Portuguese arrived. So if you ever have a chance, Darfur, Chad, Bornu, Benin, these are all considered West African areas to this day. And what this is saying is that the Nubians had already crossed over with their influence into that part of West Africa before the Portuguese arrived. I'm probably gonna mispronounce this, but they'll be okay. Jaal de Barros, describing the are found in Darfur and the Chad Arba Ghazal region. Ruins of burnt brick construction of the Nubian inspiration are found as far as Bornu. The Nubian Forme cross found its way to Bornu, and as far as Benin City before the Portuguese arrived. So if you ever have a chance, Darfur, Chad, Bornu, Benin, these are all considered West African areas to this day. And what this is saying is that the Nubians had already crossed over with their influence into that part of West Africa before the Portuguese arrived. I'm probably gonna mispronounce this, but they'll be okay. Jaal de Barros, describing the time of discovery, says that when a new king accedes in Benin, an eastern king called Ogane sends him emblems of authority, including a brass cross to be worn around the neck, similar to that worn by the knights in the Order of St. John. A similar but smaller cross was given to the Benin ambassador, which he wore around his neck and which gave him certain privileges while in Ogane's kingdom. The messenger with this cross is always depicted at the bottom of the carved elephant tusk of Benin, as displayed in the Lagos and Benin museums. So yes, if you go to those museums, you will see evidence of this, all prior to Portuguese interaction. The connection between Nubia and Benin can be filled out by writers such as Leo Africanus, whose writing about his travels around 1512 to 1514 said that the Gagal people, somewhere in the Chad Darfur region, highlight here, practiced Christianity, and that the founder of the Mandara kingdom around the Mawari in Cameroon was a Christian. The same assertion is found in the Mandara Chronicle, and Denham heard some Mandaris referred to as Christians even in 1823. And so I want to pause here for a second because I think this is important when we're talking about time frames and certain people here. So Leo Africanus is often a figure that people talk about when it comes to what Africa looked like. And recently, there's been scrutiny around Leo Africanus. I don't know why, stating that maybe he didn't go to the regions in all of Africa that he claimed and that he made things up, right? Because he actually would state that in parts of West Africa he went to, it was Christianity. The reason that it was skeptical of Leo Africanus during that time is that honestly, and scholars will tell you this, they didn't believe him because they didn't think that West Africans, when the Europeans got this information from him, were that advanced. Simply put, they thought that he was making the story up. So A, it was impossible for him to visit all these regions, and B, that these regions were so advanced, there's no way that these were actually real, that he was fantasizing, which we know, in fact, that he was telling the truth now that, yeah, these regions in within West Africa were very much so civilized and advanced. And then again, as you see here, as far early as 1823, because it's important to know that when we talk about the tropical savanna, Sudanic regions of West Africa, many the colonialists didn't really get into the interior of West Africa until sometime in the late 17th to even early 1800s. That's when you start to get these accounts. So prior to contrary belief, they were not in the interiors. They were just held to the coast of West Africa for a very long time. BK, anything you want to add to it?
Nah, man, you cooking. You cooking.
Good, man. So this is fun. The only tradition surviving is that of the Kasar migration from Egypt to the Sudan, Nubia, and then west to the Benue and Niger River valleys. Some authors would like to see the Kasara migration as one of Nubians, but this is disputed. And I want to pause here to say this, and we'll see this. Well, actually, you know what? I'll finish reading this and then I'll explain later in a second. Further up, the Benu, the Bata, and Chaba or Bachama peoples also hold to a Kasara legend and claim that they originate from the Sotuku or Gobar people. The validity of this claim has likewise been challenged. Even so, a similar claim was made for the Gobar people by, and I'm going to butcher this name, so you apologize, Abdal Kokwar ibn al-Mufa in his Ratat al-Afar, written in 1824 to 1825, that they originated from the Copts of Egypt. It matters little whether these legends are historically true or not. They only serve to confirm the penetration of Christian cultural influence from Nubia into the northeastern Nigeria and along the Benue Tiger, Benue Niger to Benin. So it's important here for us to talk about honestly in academics, right? Often you hear people talk about try to speak in absolutes and no scholar says this and no scholar says that. Well, here in this in textbooks that we have and things that we're talking about is that we see scholars admitting that, hey, not every single one agrees with us on this data. But because there's so much data about it from different sources, it serves as a confirmation to show, hey, there's some type of significant penetration that's going on, that while all these different legends and accounts from people groups in different regions of West Africa kind of having this similar origin stories, something is going out, like something's going on here. And the conclusions that the scholars are saying is with the last highlighted statement that you see is that they only serve to confirm the penetration of Christian cultural influence. So you see now they're admitting that there's dispute, but the fact that there's so much of this evidence out there, something of significance is going on.
Right. So whether or not there's a direct genetic connection, there's a definite folklore connection. Right. The information is coming from somewhere.
Right.
So, right.
And we see this today, BK. Like if something happens, you know, and people are like, well, I don't know the exact.
All right. Now, I would say this. Whenever you see a Muslim is writing, you got to be very wary because, for one, they don't like Jews normally, and they don't really care for Christians, but they respect them because they're of the Abrahamic faith. So they get a pass in whatever. But if they do hate them, they're looked at as people as non-believers because they don't accept Allah and the Messenger. All right. That's from a Muslim perspective. When they're writing at a certain time period, we already know Christianity is already engulfed. They sent over 600 missionaries to Nigeria, and they sent people earlier. So there's always the feeling of who is the most dominant force, or who is trying to take over, or who is we here in the region is trying to do stuff, which was Christianity. So I do think Christianity and traditions are circulating, just like traditions of Jewish origins are circulating, just like traditions of Islamic origins, Mecca, Medina, for these West Africans have been engulfed in this region for a long period of time. The Ghana, Mali, Songhai Kingdom. I do think there's a lady at Harvard that did a whole thing on this. I was supposed to do a presentation on it for the longest, for like 7 years now. And it talks about Christianity in pre-colonial time period. So it's not impossible, because remember, they used to trade, and Berbers would convert to whoever they rock with. So if they rock with the Jews, they convert into Judaism. They rock with the Muslims, they're Muslims. They rock with the Christians, they're Christians. And these people are trading with each other. So Berbers could have brought it to West Africa. Berbers could have come across, and hence traditions of Christianity and so forth. So I don't have a problem with Christianity being there, but I do know it's foreign to the West Africans. I do know that they don't know about no Christianity until it was brought there. All right. But anyway, let's continue the video.
reason or the exact statement of what has happened, but you have 10 to 12 people having similar accounts. Like that means, something was going on to where people have this shared experience. We see this all the time in like ancient writings when people have similar account stories. That means something was going on, right? Whether you believe one story or the other, you can at least admit that, like, hey, there's a shared experience that people are trying to recount.
Right.
So we've been hearing this word Coptic Nubia. So sometimes you may hear the term Nubia or Coptic Nubia or medieval Nubia, kind of talking in the same time frame. Medieval Nubia Christianity goes into like the late 1600s. It talks about it relishes around the Sudanic regions, which includes Chad, which is important because people often forget Chad, the Chadic region being part of the West African region as well too. And these people are descendants of ancient Kush. And so primarily when people talk about the Coptic influence, they're going to be talking about the Coptic influence through Nubia. When they talk about that side of this equation. And so people, as you see on the blue side, like Saint Anthony, for example, he's considered a Nubian. Moses the Black, for example, if you ever read about him, he's a Nubian. These are people of darker hue. And so I'll be remiss to say this is like, people are wondering, like in the Bible, where's Nubia? It's depicted as Cush, as you can see, ancient Kush.
Right.
And the great account in the Ethiopian eunuch, for example, we often, not a misnomer, but we have to also know the context in which things were written. Ethiopia at that time wasn't a kingdom or empire named Ethiopia. Right. Ethiopians means blacks, people from south of what they had as Egypt at this time. So that person could have been anywhere from Nubia all the way to present day Ethiopia, Eritrea, Kenya, whatever the region he came. It's a reflection of showing what basically what skin tone he was, just burnt faced people.
Right. But we know where he's from because of who he worked for, right? Because in the Book of Acts, it talks about Kendeke, right? And she's the queen mother, right? The equivalent of the Nesut, the pharaoh in Kemet. So, and we know that she resided in Moro, Nubia. So that gives us more clarity and also early attestation of a sub-Saharan African who is a Christian in the Bible. So,
bingo.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the North Africans. So North Africans, quick overview. They go from literally the area of North Africa through the Sahel region. So you have places like ancient Carthage or African Proconsular, Numidia, the two Mauritanias, which are in the Roman provinces. They were called the quote unquote Berber tribes, and some Punics as well too, because the Punics are descendants of the Phoenicians who settled in the Carthage region. It's important to note that they were not Roman by lineage. They were not Latin by ethnicity. They were not Roman Catholic, because Roman Catholic was not at that time was not a term used to describe a particular church. And it is important to note because these people did not live in a world where what we have today, where you put a quote unquote black church, white church. They're somewhat part of the Church of Rome. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Pope Leo, one of the early Roman popes, was a Berber, was an African Berber. So you have evidence here, remembering that these metropolitan areas like Rome, Alexandria, Carthage, around the Mediterranean were not just one ethnicity. It served with a ton of ethnicities. So a big good equivalent today would be no different than like BK. You go into New York, you're going to see all types of people from different backgrounds in this metropolitan city. You're going to see the same thing in like places like Los Angeles, Chicago, where these people from all over the world and all over the country, these different backgrounds, all living here. So just to say that, hey, and that taking this for granted, but like they're saying BK is from New York City, right? And Donald Trump is from New York City. So ergo, BK and Donald Trump are the same ethnic group.
And we are most definitely not.
Right. So now we can kind of understand this aspect of it. And so they spoke, well, they say African Latin, sometimes called Africitas or African Romance, which is basically the Latin language with a North African tongue and long words too, similar to what we have today in like the Creole languages, where you know there's English and then there's Creole English or different variations of that. It's French, it's Creole French, Haitian French, and Spanish, the same thing. All these different, we see this to this day. So it's not something new. They spoke Punic as well, from Carthage, and then the different Berber languages, like we talked about before. So this is amazing quote. BK, would you like reading this one?
Sure. In North Africa, the inhabitants along the coast were Christians. And furthermore, the Christian message had already penetrated Numidia. In the interior of the Atlas Mountains, there existed in the 3rd century 20 bishops. The faith was preached to the Getatilians and to the Mauritanians before the persecution of Emperor Decius took place. The Berber Kabyles were also Christians, and at the time of Augustine, Christianity reached as far as the forts of the edge of the Sahara Limes, which stretched along the Atlas Range. Kabylie was a Greek town in the interior of Thracia. Today, it is called Galawitsa and is situated in the Tonja River.
Perfect. Go to the next one.
All right. The Berber tribes of Libya and North Africa originally grouped themselves as Nasamons and Scilly in Crynesia and Tripolitania. Tall and slender figure, the Maxites, Musulani and Numidu, Katuri, and the Mori. It is not known how, but a small group of Mori came to live in Hausa country. The Berbers were nearly all Christians. Accordingly, the Christians of Barbary were at that time divided into 3 groups: the Catholics, the Donatists, and the Monophysites.
So I want to explain this quote a little bit more, and I definitely understand because these words are like,
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
But essentially, these are different like Berber tribes, right? And so they would have different chiefdoms. There were different names. Oftentimes, you're going to hear terms like Numidia, Numidu, Mari, for example. And Mari is always a big one because I love it because Mari is the root word which we later get more from. And so, if people ever want to ask, like, who the Moors were, I guess according to this, the Moors were originally Christians before they were anything else. And so it was the Moors that went down into West Africa later as Christians, as we will see later on, to establish Christianity there. So, if you ever want to kind of bring that back to when talking to, brothers and sisters on the other sides of the fences, to let them know, like, hey, man, the Moors are Christians first.
Boy.
And at the bottom here, I wanted to talk about where it says the Catholics, Donatists, and the Monophysites, right? And so this is coming from the author. And so we just got to make sure we put things in the proper perspectives. By Catholics and the Donatists, for example.
If you notice, I just said with the Berbers, I was just giving an example. And Kwame, when you come in, you this is from BK Apologists. You got to feel out the room, my brother. Oh man, this is the video from BK Apologists. Yikes.
It's talking about they're talking about those who were more adherent to Rome, and then the Donatist schism, who was more reflective.
Now, this is my gripe when the Christians bring this up, right? You see, everybody is so religious in their within their own convictions. They hold on to stuff that's just so you act like a religious person, in my opinion. Whether it's Kemet, whether it's Moor, whether it's Islam, not Islam, because Islam is a religion. But look at this. This is my gripe. Let's say they were there and the Berbers brought Christianity to West Africa. I have no problem with that. But what type of Christianity are they bringing? You have the Catholics, you have the Donatists, and the Monophysites. My thinking is this: we would not have Christianity if it wasn't for the Catholics. My thinking is this: we would not have Christianity if it wasn't for the Catholics. My thinking is this: we would not have Christianity if it wasn't for the Catholics. Because remember, the Catholics broke off into what? You had the Protestant movement that took over in like the 1600s, right? With John Calvin and Martin Luther. And you had the Anglican Church in England. Now show me a Christianity that you believe that doesn't come from it. Now show me a Christianity that you believe that doesn't come from it. Now show me a Christianity that you believe that doesn't come from it. Let me give an example. I have two quick examples: Mike Holloway, non-denominational, and Pastor Bennett. But check this out though. Are those versions of Christianities Donatists, the Monophysites, are branched out from the Catholics? So what is the real reason why BK apologist is Rudolph Wilson said, no, you're violating BK apologist. Stop it. BK apologist is very good when it comes to scholarship. He has very good information. You're trying to violate him because he don't believe what you believe. Get out of here with that foolishness. Now listen to this. Every Christian group that we have, all crosses lead to Rome. That's my point. Everything is everything. So when I hear Dr. Van Tu says about the he talks about the what's the word that he uses during the debate with Jabari? No one in the West. I don't see anybody in the West coming from some version that's not connected to Rome. That's the bottom line that I'm saying. No one in the West. I don't see anybody in the West coming from some version that's not connected to Rome. That's the bottom line that I'm saying. No one in the West. I don't see anybody in the West coming from some version that's not connected to Rome. That's the bottom line that I'm saying. All right? Okay.
Of those who were in North Africa, particularly Numidia and Mauritanians, the Numidians and the Moors, and those groups theologically they believe the same thing. Expressions they believe the same thing. It was, for lack of a better word, without going to full context behind it, you had one group who was like, "Hey, we're not bending the knee to the other group," and you can kind of figure out what that means even in today's language. So even before, which you had the events going on in the 14th, 15th, 16th century in Western Europe, you had in North Africa.
Politics as usual.
Politics as usual.
Politics as usual.
We're not bending the knee to this, and etc. And then Monophysites, this being an older text, ends up being a whole background behind that. Again, as BK said, the politics again is what you would call those who are now non-Chalcedonian in the what we call today the Oriental Orthodox tradition, and the more accurate terminology today is Miaphysite instead of Monophysite. But again, this is an older text, so they're using kind of older terminology. But essentially, they were arguing over the Christology expression of, how is Christ one nature or two natures, right? Is he a God and one his the hypostatic union being fully God and fully man, two natures into the hypostatic union? That's the Chalcedian side. Is kind of what we all inherited here in the U.S. That language, or the other language being that God has one nature. Christ, has one nature, and that one nature is fully God and fully man. I know it sounds very silly today when you come out, but again, we're talking about politics with language and a lot of bloodshed over the years. Luckily, they have, a lot of people have scholars have realized that throughout time that these groups are saying the same things, and now we're in the healing process, but it's a lot of baggage. So just like today, there was politics that separated believers. So as a consequence of Arab suppression, a movement amongst the Berber tribes began, especially among the Western Sahyan, who pushed into the Western Sahara on the bend of the Niger. In the 3rd century AH, again, this is because you're looking from Islamic text, the 9th century AD, the Lambunta Berbers were still Christians. Many signs speak to the Inkavar of the Twar as having been partial descendants of the Christian Gomarites, Makarites, and Mazis of the Atlas, of the Hawa, and of the Auroras and people of Targa. And I'm sorry, all of these words are just different tribes of North Africans. So when you see Atlas, you're talking about the Atlas Mountains there. And one of the sources you can get that is the Berbers in West Africa, early Christianity in Africa, North Africa, the Sahara, the Sudan, Central and East Africa, a contribution to ethno-history by Ludwig Brandal, Das Presence in Africa. So, you know what, BK, if you don't mind, read this.
Yeah,
water.
No problem. Trans-Saharan trade. The importance that contact with the Islamic world held for these empires cannot be understated. While extensive trading networks undoubtedly predated Arabic involvement, the development of trans-Saharan commerce in the 7th century by Arabs and Berbers intensified and expanded the trading networks that made the empires of the Western Sudan possible. The Savannah region is naturally hospitable to both agriculture and livestock breeding and is ideally situated for trade. An easily traversed region separating radically different environments, each possessing resources and products badly needed by the other, it is likely that the Savannah was an important trading arena long before the first camel caravans arrived from North Africa, 3rd to 4th century AD.
So what this is saying, basically, is showing you the beginning of the trend. One, that these routes already began, but the Arab suppression that ends up coming into West Africa and North Africa made people flee. And they fled into places that they knew long before the first, as they said, the 3rd, 4th century AD. Like these were known places to go. And we see this today, right? Like when people flee for whatever reason, it could be famine, it can be wartime, it can be stuff like that. They typically take the same routes that they always historically done. Like I live in Louisiana, for example, and we're in the middle of hurricane season. So when people want to evacuate for hurricane season, they typically take the same routes that they've always taken. They don't have to be kind of taught and told to go this way or that way. They know the roads, they know the back roads, they even know the places that they should go to avoid the storm for the most part. So just like here, when they have the oppression going on, they know where to go.
Right.
So I want to describe here the Hutchins Center, and this is the prequel to the video we're going to show. But the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University supports research on the history and culture of people of African descent of the world over, and provides a forum for collaboration and the ongoing exchange of ideas. It seeks to stimulate scholarly engagement in Africa and African American studies, both at Harvard and beyond, to increase public awareness and understanding of this vital field of study. As the preeminent research center in the field, the Hutchins Center sponsors visiting fellows, art exhibitions, publications, research projects, archives, readings, conferences, and new media initiatives that respond to and excite the interest in establishing and emerging channels of inquiry in African and African American research. Woo-hoo.
All right, so you want to play the video now, or
let me see the next slide real quick. Just want to make sure.
All right, I'm not gonna play the whole video. What I'll do is I'll put the video in the so y'all can watch the rest of it. But it was pretty, so far it's pretty good. It's pretty good. He has some good stuff. I screened ahead to look at whatever. I mean, to me, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. And it's just like somebody claiming to be Jewish and there's traditions. Nobody's saying there's no Jews in West Africa or whatever. But these Christian Berbers, are they saying that the Berbers came on the slave ship? Are they saying that Christianity was in West Africa? Yeah, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal.